So one of the most important lessons I learned in my software development career, going back to the 90s, is humility. So let me explain. I was called in to do a project for a brand new client when I was freelancing, and they wanted me to extend the functionality of an app that they had in production. Small business, and they had developed an app that was PHP based. Now this is old crappy PHP, PHP 3 I think it was, maybe earlier than that. It was pretty bad. At the time, as a young developer with a few years experience under my belt, I was a big Java guy. So this is maybe 98, somewhere around 98. So it was actually, 1998, we'll say 99 maybe. Could have been 97, so long. Anyway, so they had this old PHP app that they wanted to extend. And at that point in time, I was pretty much a Java zealot, as I just said. I didn't like coding anything but Java. And Java at the time was so far ahead of the competition. It wasn't even close, especially versus old school PHP 3, we'll say. Bad. PHP 3 didn't have try-catch. It wasn't object-oriented. It had simple die statements. It was loosely typed. It was just a bad, bad language. So I go in to see the new client, and I say, okay, we look at the job, and I say, okay, listen, yeah, I can build this, no problem, but we should rebuild the whole thing from scratch using Java because Java is far superior. And what did the client say to me? The client said, no. I was like, no. He says, if you want the job, we have to do it with PHP. It was a good job, very good money for the time, so I was not, I didn't want to lose this job. So I came to a compromise. I said, you know what, how about this? How about we keep your old PHP stuff. I wanted to say crappy PHP, but you don't want to insult people's products. So I said, well, keep your old PHP, and then I'll create the new modules in Java. And so what did he say to me? He said, no. I was like, He said to me, if you could speak to Uncle Steph would say, this is not a good idea what you're suggesting here. Of course, at the time, I was just young whippersnapper cousin Steph, without the spice of experience, if you will. Anyway, so I took the gig. I took the gig with reluctance because the money was good. And I said, they want to keep it all PHP. He said, I don't want, my contact at the company said, we don't want to have two different code bases to maintain. We don't want to have to keep a PHP code base going and then a Java code base. That means we have to get two different developers probably, blah, 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 yada, 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 yada. Whatever. So I took the money. I said, I'll do it. So I started with great reluctance to work with PHP. And at the time, I had never used PHP before. Anyway, so sure enough, it was a crappy language compared to Java in many respects, except for one thing. PHP was optimized, designed for building web apps, whereas Java was a general purpose language. And what this meant in practice was that it was much, much easier to get something up and running in PHP despite its shortcomings, which there were many. At that time, I would never even think about designing anything big with PHP. Today, PHP, C#, Java, JavaScript, TypeScript, they're all neck and neck in terms of their capability. They're all capable. Some areas TypeScript is better, some areas C# is better, some areas PHP is better, but they're all very good. You can't make a bad choice in that regard. So what's the lesson here? The lesson is that when you're young, you think you know it all, but you actually don't. Now, the reason, why do you, when I say young, 20, 25, something like that, 30. So why do you think you know it all at 20 years old when you don't? Well, it's because of perspective. When you compare your 20-year-old self, your scope of knowledge and experience then versus your 10-year-old self, there's a huge difference, right? So I can understand why you'd think 20-year-old Steph is pretty smart, because your frame of reference is what you knew and what you understand at 10 years old. Big difference. Here's the thing though, at 20, number one, your brain is literally not fully developed. You're not playing with a full deck of cards. Brains take up to about 25 years old to develop fully. So understand, you're 20 years old, you're 19 years old, you're 15 years old, you're 22 years old, you're still not fully developed. You're not at your full potential just in terms of biology. That's number one. Number two, you don't know much. Trust me, if you think about how much you know at 20 versus your 20-year-old self versus your 10-year-old self, big gulf, right? Big difference. Imagine when you get to 30, and then 40, and then 50. Of course, the rate of change sort of flattens out, meaning you learn so much more from 10 to 20. From 20 to 30, you do learn a lot more, but it's not as big a difference, I would argue, than from 10 to 20, and so on and so forth. So the slope of change, the rate of change, that slope, when I'm talking about slope, I'm talking about the graph, if you were to graph the rate of change, flattens out over time. But nonetheless, I can tell you, being old as the hills, what I know now and my perspective now is all night and day relative to what I knew when I was 20, 30, even 40. Like, from my perspective, young whippersnapper, 40-year-old Uncle Steph, barely an uncle. I knew a lot more than my 30-year-old self, but man, I know much more now. Life, if you engage in it, and you have an open mind, and you're willing to accept new ideas, which you should do, it's better for you, willing to be wrong, you'll learn a lot over time. The more perspective you have, the better off you're going to be. I once won an argument, a long time ago. I got into a big argument with somebody. It was an early lesson in my early 20s. And I won the argument amongst a group of people. It was conceded by the group, say, oh, yeah, Steph definitely won that argument. And I remember 6 months later, I realized I was wrong. And in fact, the person who lost the argument was actually right. So I won the argument through power of persuasion and just better arguments. But I was actually wrong. So did I win back then when I won the argument? No, I actually lost. Because even though, as far as the people around me and as far as my own perception at the time, I had won, in reality I had lost because I had obfuscated reality from my own understanding, my own perception. Not a good place to be. So one of the lessons I learned with that PHP experience and dealing with that manager was that languages, they all have their pros and cons. Some are good at this, some are good at that. B, you learn things over time. So the most secure individual is also amongst the most humble. They're the most effective people. So what do I mean by that? So if you go into business, if you're a freelance developer or you're developing a SaaS product, there's a certain amount of confidence you have to have in yourself, of course. But at the same time, you have to be humble, right? The best developers are humble in that they're willing to accept when they're wrong, or willing to let evidence guide them in a direction. Don't let ideology being, I'm a Java guy and Java's the best and everything else sucks. Don't let ideology pull you down paths that are not going to be beneficial to you or beneficial to you in any way. So that was the lesson of that particular gig. So I got paid thousands of dollars to write this addition to their applications. But what was more valuable from that interaction was I figured out these basic rules I just mentioned. So if you're watching this, you're young, and you have strong opinions about this language or that language and so forth, I would suggest that you check yourself a little bit, meaning understand that you could be wrong. It's possible. And be open-minded to new ideas. And just because you think that C# is the best, or TypeScript is the best, or C# is the best, it could be the best for certain things. Well, they definitely are, but just recognize that you could be wrong. Also recognize if you're under 30 or under 25, your brain is not fully developed. So you're probably not perceiving things as accurately as you will when you get a little bit older and a little bit more experienced. And don't worry about it. That's okay. We all go through it. It's not a big deal. Hey, I'm Uncle Steph. If you haven't seen my videos before, this is me. I've been in the software development game, commercially writing code since 1994, 95, I forget exactly when. I don't count writing little games and so on back in the 80s when I had my TR-99 Texas Instruments. I think it was TR-99. Anyway, I used to write little game apps, very basic stuff like the bouncing ball and stuff. That doesn't count. That doesn't count. A little tip for your resume, or if you're learning to code, building your little games or copying a tutorial online is not, it's like, in terms of prepping you for a job, it's like takes you to level 2 on 10. You have to get out there and start building real things. But anyway, so I've been doing this from 94 commercially, and this channel is all about me sharing my experience about software development, looking at the news, what's going on now, and giving you my experienced opinion about certain things. Again, I'm not right about everything, but I think I'm often more right than wrong. That's for sure. That just comes with age.